Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day, still recovering from my slight panic when someone asked me a question about football finances on social media, and he is Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, what was going on? People wanted to see my spreadsheets next.
It was. I could tell from your furrowed brow at the time. Fortunately, it was Pancake Day, and we were more concentrating on lemon and icing sugar, lemon and castor sugar versus the Baroness had banana chocolate spread and ice cream on hers. Kevin, that's shocking.
On her pancakes.
Well, yes. Good.
Okay, let's let's set the bar low before we even start, Kieran. Yeah. No, I'm not mucking about with pancakes. We had a falling out last year when I tried Marmite peanut butter on pancakes. Ali suggested that her pancakes were nice enough without me putting. This conversation can only go down a cul-de-sac, Kieran, so let's move on with the show. Later in this show, we'll be hearing from James Grimes, a former gambling addict and now a senior program manager at Gambling with Lives, a charity established by the families of young people who took their own lives as a result of betting issues. I think, Kieran, I know I say this after virtually every interview we do, but this was not harrowing. It was a brilliant interview, but I think it's one of the most important interviews we've done, and I hope people will understand why when we get to hear it. It's a must listen, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But before that, Kieran, we have to deal with the news, and there's plenty of it. And our first news story, we spoke last week about Jim Parmenter, the angry owner of Dover Athletic, and now his angry words have turned into angry actions and more angry words.
Yes, Jim is clearly unhappy with the responses that he's been getting from the National League. So he says we're not going to play football. We're going to put the players onto furlough. We're going to try to keep the club in hibernation because I want there to be a Dover Athletic Football Club in 1 year's time, in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time. I went on to Company's House, so as you know, is my want. Dover lost £500,000 in 2019, which was pre-pandemic. So I would hate to think how large the losses were during the close down. The shareholders have put £2 million into the club, so it's not a case of that. They've been trying to run it on a shoestring. People such as the owner has been very generous over the past few years, but they've reached a stage where enough is enough. I know the cynics will say, well, hold on, Dover Athletic are bottom of the table. They've got nothing to play for. He's trying to, there's self-interest operating here. But for all we know, it could be that the tables could be decided on points per game and they'll get relegated anyway. So why are clubs in the National League playing football? I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. And last night, Darlington effectively took the same step. They've been in administration 3 times, and I can remember going to Darlington when they were a football league club, and going to Feetham's, and it was a good day out, like so many of these towns and cities are, which otherwise you'd never see. Unless you're a football fan, you'd never visit them. So it was a great chance to go out and see somewhere new. The owners have said we don't want to give the club a debt burden because we've been in administration. And again, they're towards the bottom of the table. They've only actually played 11 matches all season. So, how on earth they were going to fit in the best part of another 30 games before the end of the season was a logistical nightmare. But you can see, and it's not just these two clubs, it's other clubs who are also saying, we've got to take a look at the long-term interest. Football at that level, is it important?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, I don't think it is in terms of what should we be concentrating on in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
We want these clubs to exist. We want them to survive. Playing matches in front of nobody, to be seen by two men and a dog on a pretty dodgy stream at best, is just increasing the losses. The National League are coming out of this with very little credit because if they are supposed to show leadership, and it's a void at present.
And basically what Jim Parmenter's saying, very simply, saying it to the National League and the government, you give us the money and we'll play football. That in the meantime, we're not going to bankrupt ourselves by playing football for, as you say, no apparent reason.
Yeah, it's cheaper to put to give the clubs grants to see out the rest of the season than to stop playing football and put everybody on furlough. So surely from an exchequer point of view, they've got to see the sense here as well.
Well, Barrow have furloughed some of their players too, but it just strikes me, Kieran, is it not quite late in the day to start the furlough process? Because it looks like we're finally coming out of this and the furlough process will probably be ending very shortly anyway.
Well, 58 EFL clubs have taken furlough out of the 72. And I think the EFL is a completely different beast to the Premier League. So when the likes of Liverpool and Spurs initially took the furlough, there was a backlash from fans. There was also a backlash from politicians. But I think the reaction to EFL clubs, whose finances are far more modest than those of the Premier League, is different. I think Barrow here are skating on thin ice because what they've actually done is to say, we've got half a dozen players who realistically are not going to get a match for the rest of the season. And they've just gone out and signed 9 players in the January window. So this one, it looks as if that Barrow are utilising the taxpayer as a means of continuing the season with an improved squad. But those players who are not part of the manager's plans are effectively being told, just spend your time at home. Now, this is discretionary. The players have to agree to it. And the club, to its credit, have said, you will not be worse off financially. So we will top up your wages. Under the furlough scheme, the government pays 80% of the first £2,500 per month. But it's one of those areas where I think, well, this was not the intention of the job retention scheme, because the keywords there, job retention. These are people who Barrow Football Club effectively said, we have no future with these players, but we are now going to use government cash or taxpayer cash as a means of being able to pay them and improve the club's finances.
There's a furlough theme developing. I was going to say that's alliteration, but only in a London accent, isn't it? Technically, it's a furlough theme. There's a furlough theme developing here, everybody. Wrexham players and staff who received reduced wages while on furlough will get any money they lost back from new owners Rob McElhenney and Ryan Rodney Reynolds.
Yeah, I think McElhenney and Rodney have really knocked it out of the park in terms of public relations since they first became involved with Wrexham Football Club. In the autumn, Wrexham is part of the National League. Players did go on furlough, as did other members of staff. Some of them ended up financially worse off. Some took pay cuts and things of this nature. And McElhenney and Reynolds have come in and said, we recognise the sacrifices you made at a time when we were not involved with the club. So this was pre the takeover, but we want to acknowledge what you've done, and in the spirit of goodwill, they are going to make up the balance in terms of the money that staff members have lost prior to these two gents taking over the club. And as a gesture, it's first of all, I'm sure it's appreciated, but it's a positive. Again, we speak so often about there are many things which make you proud to be connected to football. And I think in the last 24 hours, we've seen the actions of Lou Macari in terms of homelessness in the Stoke area. And it just makes you smile and remember why you love the game and the sport and so many of the people attached to it.
And also, from a Wrexham fan's point of view, it gives a reassurance as to the reasons why those men have taken over the club, doesn't it? That these people are clearly not in there as asset strippers. These people are clearly understanding what football means to a community.
Yes, and you've got to give them a lot of credit because it's not the glamorous part of football, as we know, but they've approached it with a smile and they've done their due diligence. Certainly they've invested £2 million into the club, which they've said, we're not going to go. We're not going to be Abramovich. We're not going to go on a wages spree. We're looking for sustainability. But they appear to get football, and that's fantastic to hear.
Yes, for any new listeners, I should explain the Rodney reference. Basically, Kieran has been cock-a-hoop since he discovered at Company's House that the gorgeous millionaire Ryan Reynolds' middle name is Rodney, which Kieran seems to think he'd rather not be a gorgeous millionaire than be called Rodney, to be honest. And also, I'm just making a note to myself, don't use the expression cock-a-hoop anymore in front of Kieran. Chelsea will pay Frank Lampard £1.8 million between now and June, unless he takes another job as manager, which is yet another reason, optimistic Palace fans, why I don't think we should expect him at Selhurst Park anytime in the near future.
Yes, so it looks as if Frank Lampard has been put on some form of gardening leave by the club. £1.8 million to listen to our podcast really for the next 16 weeks is something that even I'd be prepared to do. So
it's basically that's what Guy gets for listening to it, basically, isn't he? That's fair enough.
So Frank Lampard, he was well thought of at Derby County. He made an impact, I think, at Chelsea, and clearly it didn't work out in the end. But his name has been linked with clubs such as Celtic and potentially Palace, although both of those clubs, of course, do have existing managers. Although, is it right that Roy's contract expires in the summer, the same as Neil Lennon? Is that right?
Yes, the two are not linked, but I think for the benefit of all concerned, Roy's contract does expire this summer, along with 12 of the players. Yeah, so most Palace fans are working on the assumption that we will be looking for a new manager in the near future, certainly. Right.
Well, under those circumstances, what would you do if you were Frank Lampard? It's a lot of money to forego, unless, of course, a club comes in with an offer which is financially advantageous to him.
Yeah, I'd probably go to Antigua, somewhere like that, if I was Frank Lampard.
I think there's a bit of a problem with that at present.
Well, yeah, of course, when this is all over, Kieran, I can't see any circumstances which I'll be going to Antigua in the next 5 years. But yeah, I've got an imagination. Well, I'll tell you where we are going, Kieran. Oh my God, that was a one-show link. And there's, subconsciously, Frank Lampard and one show. I'll tell you where we're going right now, Kieran. We're going to Scotland and Greenock Morton, whose fans are close to buying the club but may not get hold of the ground, Capello.
Yes, I mean at Greenock Morton, there is a fans group called MCT, which stands for Morton Club Together, and they now actually own 58% of the shares, so they've got control of the club. I went through the list of shareholders of Greenock Morton, which I think ran to 14 pages, but by the time I'd added them all up on my spreadsheet, they were around about 58% of the total. So they do. It was the minutes flew by when I was doing that, as you can imagine. So they bought the club from a company called Golden Casket. Nice. So I had to check that because I used to teach in Frankfurt, and there was a nightclub of a similar name, which I used to go to when I was bored.
Yeah, I've done with this spreadsheet now. I'll just pop down a Golden Casket just before just get one in before closing time.
That's right. And the Golden Casket still owns Capello, which is the Greenock Morton Stadium. Now, the present agreement is that they're only charging a peppercorn rent to the fans group. So the previous owners, they're not particularly fussed about it. And there's a £2 million debt hanging over the ownership of Capello. It now transpires that the fans group is thinking of buying the stadium, and if so, it will end up inheriting that debt. So things start to get messy because the MCT have said, well, if we do acquire the stadium, of course, that gives us control over it in terms of developing it, expanding the infrastructure, being able to use it for multifunction purposes without having to ask the landlord's permission and things of that nature. But it will come with that £2 million debt. Golden Casket have said, we're not going to ask for that £2 million unless the club goes into liquidation and the only or to administration. And the only reason why that will be the case is if MCT have struggles themselves. So it gets very complicated. And it now appears that the club is, or rather MCT, are going to, and this is where I like the democratisation of fan-owned clubs, they're going to say, well, we've got a choice. We can either carry on as tenants or we can acquire the stadium and the consequences that go along with it. But we're going to let the fans make that final decision.
So I was slightly distracted at the end, Kieran. I was wondering what would happen if you accidentally wandered into the Golden Casket in Frankfurt and asked the barman where the gents was. And still in Scotland, there are some musical chairs going on at Falkirk, whose stadium is I love this name of Falkirk Stadium, Brockville, which is a great name for the stadium. Oh, it's the Falkirk Stadium now, unfortunately, but it used to be Brockville, which I like. It used to be Randyford Park back in the day, which is an even better name. But yes, so musical chairs are going on at Falkirk, as Guy said.
Yes, Falkirk has been seeking investment, has been seeking a new owner for some time. In 2019, the person involved with a potential takeover was a guy called Mark Campbell. He subsequently turned up claiming he wanted to buy Sunderland, and that fizzled out. So it could be that he is a tyre kicker. He likes to go around clubs to to see what's on offer, to perhaps to see whether there is value in them. But that deal's not gone through. They've now got the French guy in charge. And then the rumour started to circulate about a couple of American investors. And over the course of the last week or two, there's been 15 documents lodged at Companies House. Again, that gets me giddy with excitement, as we know. And so we've now got 2 American investors who have taken over the club. And they put in 340 grand, which is great again in terms of helping the clubs to survive. I think there are certainly issues in Scottish football, apart from a handful of clubs. The majority of them are very much sort of hunkering down and are needing financial support. But it does look like they've got potentially a positive future here, and it's good to see people coming in and putting their money where their mouth is.
The Merseyside derby is approaching. I said derby. I just realised that. The Merseyside derby is approaching, which is a small matter, of course, compared to Palace Brighton. But there's some good news already for Everton fans this week.
Yes, this is in respect of Bramley Moor Dock. This is the site that the club wants in terms of moving to a new stadium. And I'm the same as you, Kevin. I've been to Goodison as a away fan. I think my first trip was 80, 81 or sometime like that. And it's not changed much since then. And that's both good and bad. When you're 6'3" like me, it's not particularly good because you can't sit down. But that smell, that football ground smell, which we all remember from being a kid, that's still there, and the memories and the history and the heritage. But whilst that's great from a romantic point of view, it means that Everton is really significantly behind when it comes to generating money from ticket sales. So Bramley Moor Dock, a council report was commissioned, and that's given the green light to the stadium, which will have a capacity of 52,000. It will then go to a formal council vote on the 23rd of February. But normally, unless there are individual councillors with a big axe to grind, that this should now be approved. And then it will have to go to government approval. So those are all the positives. There's a missing issue. It's going to cost 500 million quid.
Whoa.
Exactly. Woo is the word. And where is that money coming from? So, we do have a very wealthy owner in Farhad Moshiri. He does have business connections historically with Ashimov, who was involved at Arsenal and who is sponsoring the training ground and the women's team sponsorship, shirt sponsorship, and also this strange arrangement where his company has the option to name the stadium. So I think that banks would be a bit twitchy at lending £500 million as far as the stadium is concerned. The council had said that they would act effectively as the guarantor of any borrowings, but I'm not sure that will go down well necessarily with local taxpayers. Or the council will act as an intermediary in terms of borrowing. So there seems to be a few things sort of on the back burner here. But it would be great to me if anybody's seen the architect's drawings. It looks absolutely sensational development, and it will be used for the usual suspects: concerts, weddings, funerals, conferences, all that type of stuff. They want it to form a sort of a hub of one of these sort of areas. So there'll be retail developments, there'll be housing as well. And it is, there are areas of Merseyside which suffer from social deprivation. As you know, I teach there myself, and Liverpool is Liverpool's just a great city. It's an amazing city to be a student. It's an amazing city to work. But at the same time, there are aspects of it which need improving. So this could potentially help there as well.
Although to their enormous credit, as part of their, I think, 10-year plan, they called it, Everton have said that they will continue to invest in the area around Goodison Park long after they've gone, which is very good because it's an area that needs investment. When you say lenders are twitchy, Kieran, is that simply because of the amount involved, £500 million, or are there other reasons they might be twitchy?
Lenders don't tend to be too bothered about amounts because they will often form consortiums themselves. So there could be a group of lenders. Lenders are always concerned about the ability to repay. So £500 million is a lot of money. Is that a problem? Whilst you're in the Premier League, it isn't. We're fully aware that Everton have never been relegated, so that shouldn't be an issue. But some of the peripheral things which are impacting upon football at present. So there's still more talk about. There's been some talk in the European Club Association today from Agnelli in Juventus, again saying all European leagues should be reduced to 18 teams. Well, if you're a club such as Everton who aren't getting into the Champions League, all of a sudden you're going from 38 matches a season to 34. If you're not getting into one of the peripheral competitions in Europe, and they don't tend to be lucrative anyway, you've got 17 home matches a season. The Carabao Cup is probably going to go. The FA Cup is going to be no replays. All of this has an impact upon those clubs, such I would say the below the just below the rich six brigade. And I'd say here we're looking at Everton, Leicester, West Ham, Newcastle, Villa, Leeds, clubs of that nature, who want to break through that glass ceiling, and this is putting more and more space between them, which is, of course, the aim of the rich clubs. It's to make sure that there's less competition in the Premier League. But if there's fewer matches taking place, then that's fewer opportunities to generate the revenue to repay these loans.
Huddersfield fans have bought 11,000 season tickets for 2021 despite COVID to help the club with cash flow. Now, producer Guy actually wrote season cards rather than season tickets, to which I actually wrote back, "Do we live in America, Guy? Do we?" its season tickets. I think this is a good news story, Kieran, but quite a few fans, it's not just Huddersfield, quite a few fans have bought their season tickets in advance, and are now going through the process of getting them refunded, aren't they?
Yes. I think you've got to look at the terms and conditions of individual deals by individual clubs. I think as part of the commitment, first of all, this is for Championship football. The tickets were priced at £249, which is pretty damn good value for 23 matches.
Yeah.
And if you did buy one this season, the club guaranteed no price rises for a further 3 years. So Huddersfield could bounce back into the Premier League and be paying £249. So it is quite a good deal. I've not managed to get the full analysis of the small print, but I think that if the matches weren't taking place, you automatically got a clearly access to iFollow and things of that nature. So, and that could be for both home and away. So, it worked out as a reasonable price. But the fact that 11,000 people, last autumn, when there was so much uncertainty with regards to, are we going to see football? We're not going to see football. It's going to be 2,000 of us. I think it just shows the love that fans give to a club when they know that it's in financial straits.
And on a similar note, Oldham are offering refunds to fans who bought season tickets, which is good, but not the full amount, which is less so.
Yes. Oldham have a bit of an issue in terms of the relationship between the executives of the club and a significant amount of the fan base. There's not a lot of transparency. There's not a lot of communication coming out. That one of the fan groups offered my services to take a look at the accounts, and I say I'll do this from a completely neutral perspective. I wouldn't charge a penny, of course. I'm a football fan first and foremost, and the club said no, we don't want any of that. We never heard of him, which is fine. He claims to be an accountant. It could be a turf accountant for all we know. We're not. We don't want anybody looking at the numbers. Unless we effectively have control of the operations. So I felt that was a bit disappointing because all the fans want to know is that they want a degree of certainty. So in respect of what was happening on Oldham, that their season tickets were priced at £270. And again, you're buying blind to a certain extent. And what the club have now said is that if you did buy a season ticket, we're going to take away £10 per match because you were able to see us play the home games using iFollow. And iFollow, it has been a fair money spinner for EFL club fans. And you've got to give credit to all the parties there. Lots of the fans know that it's a pretty mediocre product, but at least it's an opportunity to see the club that we love, and it's a chance of getting money into them. But I think the thing which grates with quite a few people is some people don't have particularly good or any internet access, so therefore iFollow's of no use to them. They might be older or firm, they might not have great eyesight, so watching it on a small screen isn't necessarily what you want to get into in terms of football. And Oldham has said, well, we're going to take away £10 per match from the £270 for your season ticket. That leaves £40. And we're not going to give that £40 until a minimum of the end of May. Right. So I think the club's coming out of this not particularly well, certainly in terms of public relations. I'm fully aware that the clubs have cash flow issues themselves, but if they are going to do things of this nature, you've got to be upfront with the fans, and Oldham have not been in this particular circumstances.
Yeah, my guess, Kieran, is that they very much have heard of you, and that's why they don't want you looking at the books. Basically, if they generally hadn't heard of you, if it was me, they'd go, I don't know, he can have a look. Well, no, not letting Detective Maguire anywhere near out. Anyway, two positive stories to end on, Kieran, before our big interview. And the first is that former Stoke and Burnley forward John Waters has thrown his hat into the ring for the chief executive job at the PFA. And why not, I say?
Yes, so this is replacing Gordon Taylor. who is the present chief executive. So John Walters, who I think he's been very open about some of his personal problems as a professional footballer, and the challenges that brings. And he says he wants to help fellow players who have been through similar circumstances to himself. So he's put his name forwards. The present chairman of the PFA, Ben Purkis, is also putting his name forward, and this has this has resulted in what John Walters describes as a frank exchange of views between the two gentlemen involved. So it was, it's a bit like that discussion we had as to who was the hardest Teletubby, and that got pretty feisty, as you probably remember, Kevin.
Indeed.
John Walters is claiming that there was some form of gentleman's agreement that anybody who was already in a senior executive position at the PFA wouldn't put their name forwards to be the chief executive. With Ben Purkis being the chairman, we don't know what's been said, but it does appear to be not particularly harmonious at present in the PFA. John Walters has praised Gordon Taylor. He said he was responsible for overturning the salary cap at the EFL, though I think our money was on Nick DeMarco having a hand in that as well. I'm still shaking with sort of in awe of somebody as smart as Nick DeMarco talking to me. I thought he was incredible on the show the other day. So that's where we're at. So it looks like there are two potential people, and it will go down to a vote of the members. But it's an issue which really needs to be resolved as quickly as possible.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Yeah, I'm going to say this only once more, Kieran. In terms of the people inside the Teletubbies, Tinky Winky was the hardest by a country mile. Right? You can get Nick DeMarco to take me to any court in the land. I will stand by that. Finally, Kieran, and bear with me here, please, Kieran. There's a wonderful account by soldiers of the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry who took Pegasus Bridge the night before D-Day and were told to hold until relieved. And the next morning, exhausted and nearly overwhelmed, they tell how they hear the faint sound of bagpipes in the distance as Lord Lovat's commandos came to relieve them. It's a very emotional story. And this story may just be the faint sound of bagpipes for football in the distance, Kieran, because the FA Cup and Carabao Cup finals may see fans inside Wembley.
Yes, this is fingers crossed. It won't be full capacity or anything of this nature, but there are whispers, and that's where we are at present. That when we start to come out of lockdown, and it will be gradual, it will be a gradual process. Right. The government is looking for some showpiece events, and the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup, which will be taking place in, I think it's the first one's around about the 25th of May, and then the FA Cup's 3 weeks later, are being lined up. So, I would just be absolutely delighted. I'm sure you've watched some of the Test match as well, where England got slaughtered over the course of the past few days. But there was a crowd there, and it was a completely different sport.
It was brilliant, wasn't it?
And if this can be the case, and they are successful, then next season things will be looking much more positive. And there's also talk of Euro 2020. It could be that more of the games will be taking place in England because the vaccination program has exceeded all expectations, and I've got friends in the NHS, and I'm sure you have as well. The job that they have done to date in getting so many people vaccinated has been stupendous. So it could be that if the UK is ahead of the rest of Europe in terms of vaccinations, that we could be of a significant number of matches taking place here in England, and with some fans attending as well.
Wouldn't that be wonderful, Kieran? They may only be whispers, but I will take whispers as we speak at the moment. Kieran, it's interview time, and as you know, we try to inject a little humour into our interviews if we can, but I don't know if that was possible when we spoke to James Grimes, who's Senior Programme Manager at Gambling with Lives, a charity established by the family of young people who took their own lives as a result of betting issues. And we spoke to James to find out about the relationship between football and gambling. James, thank you for joining us. Before we talk about gambling in football, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your own experience?
Of course, yeah. I started gambling, like many really, as a teenager. I was 16 years old and I was a massive football fan, and I used to believe the adverts when they said things like it matters more when there's money on it, and Ray Winston telling you to bet in play now. And I thought that it was something that went hand in hand with football. So I started gambling quite often, and then I realised that I was at the bookies when my friends weren't coming with me anymore, and it was starting to become a problem pretty early into my teenage years, to be honest. And it very rapidly escalated from that small casual £5 accumulator that a lot of people will be aware of, to me playing roulette on my phone in bed at night and choosing to play casino games instead of going out socialising and stuff. And that was before I was real legal age to actually use online gambling. And the minute I had access to that, it completely overwhelmed me, to be honest. I probably shouldn't say this, but I remembered how amazing it was that I could bet on any sport anywhere in the world, because that's what my brain was screaming out for me to do. It was telling me to gamble wherever and whenever I could. And this thing in my pocket allowed me to do that. It really did take hold very quickly. My university was a complete blur, to be honest. I spent most of it in bed gambling and worrying about debts. And for 12 years of my life, it was an overwhelming addiction that didn't just take money away from me. It took so much more, to be honest. And as people out there that struggle with gambling will know, it's the detrimental effect it has on your mental health, on your relationships, on your career prospects. You know, I was like a UEFA B licensed football coach, and I was really motivated. I had 100 things I wanted to do before I was 30 on my wall, and gambling literally and metaphorically stripped all those things away from me. And yeah, I sometimes forget how bad it was, I think, because I've come quite desensitized to it. But yeah, I'm now nearly 3 years without a bet, and I can say that life is infinitely better, but I know there's a lot of people out there still struggling, and I just know how hard that was for me and how hard it is for them now.
Well, do you know what, on a personal level, James, I wasn't going to say this, but I think you've touched on part of the problem, because I have friends, I think we probably all have, a lot of us listening to this, and we laugh about the fact. I mean, he would turn up before Palace games, and he would have been, because he works shifts, but we would laugh about the fact that he'd put money on a Uruguayan tennis match at 3:00 in the morning, and we shouldn't have been laughing about that. We should have been saying to him, mate, has it occurred to you you've got a problem? And I think that's part of the issue, isn't it? That we all kind of refuse to accept that an addiction is happening around us, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think I got a lot from friends over the years was, oh, it's just James, he likes a bet. And I think that narrative is still there now. I don't think gambling addiction is seen in the same light. I don't think, quite bluntly, that people realise that it's got a suicide risk attached to it. And I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that bet on Uruguayan tennis who don't resort to suicidal thoughts, obviously, but I think the narrative is that gambling is this legitimate leisure activity that's completely normalised in society. And so people don't see those warning signs. And when they did, for me, it was way too late. Like, friends tried to intervene and I would just squirm in denial, basically, and be like, no, I've got it in control. I know how to bet on football, when really I was just deeply addicted.
Jane, my generation grew up with images of footballers on team coaches playing cards on their way to Wembley. So it's always been an issue in football. But can you give us an idea of the scale of gambling in professional football now?
Yeah, I mean, the environment that footballers play in does obviously not help that. I know we've had recent examples as well with integrity matters like Kieran Trippier, but I think it's a real hidden problem in football because most footballers are bound by contracts and financial commitments that unfortunately are tied in with gambling companies. So it will take quite a lot to have people that come out and stand up against gambling companies and to be honest about what it's doing to people in the changing room. And it is quite shocking that there's probably only 5 or 6 footballers that you can think of that have been open with gambling addiction, because as you said yourself there, it's obviously rife. And outside of the dressing room, it's rife amongst fans. We've got a generation of young football fans that think they have to have a bet on to watch the football. It's become that normalised, and I dread to think, to be completely honest, what the long-term impact is if this is going to be. I don't think we've seen the damage it's going to cause just yet.
And presumably as well, because those days of football card schools are long gone, I guess, and gambling for the players is now a solitary activity, isn't it? It's something they do on their own in the corner on their phone. So it's difficult for other people to pick up on whether they've got a problem in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, like there's a difference between playing card games with your mates and having a bet on the pools and having an accumulator once a week to playing highly addictive casino games and products that are associated with so much harm that, as I said, are in your pocket. We essentially have a super casino in our pockets without really any restrictions. And if you don't understand the risks involved, and if you don't have that awareness, and you're drawn in by the offers and the free bets and the bonuses, it's a pretty perfect storm for addiction. And footballers feel that probably just as much as anybody.
We had Dean Hammond on our show last week, who's recently retired from football. He played for Southampton, Leicester and Brighton. And he was telling us that young players are given virtually no help in managing their finances on any level. So presumably they're not being warned or even advised about gambling. When they suddenly start earning all this money, there's no one around to tell them the pitfalls.
No, I listened to the episode with Dean. I thought it was really insightful. It's an angle that I've not thought about before as a fan. That we just, I think you mentioned in the podcast yourself, Kevin, that we see footballers on this pedestal. Really, that we think everything's going to be all right. They're fine. They're just footballers, but they're in precarious financial situations when it stops. And taking it back to gambling, I know there are companies out there that deliver awareness sessions, but I don't think it tackles the sheer presence of the environment that they play in. What good is it really telling people to gamble responsibly when you've got gambling adverts flashing around the pitch and they're running out on a Saturday with a gambling brand on their shirt? I think there's a level of hypocrisy there, and it's that we need to get to that moment where footballers aren't playing in an environment that's facilitating addiction so much.
We'll talk about this a little later in the interview, but don't get me started on when the fun stops, because anybody who's been around people who have gambling problems know that there's no fun involved. The fun has long gone out of gambling. I mean, you talk about that route. I mean, I limit myself. I love horse racing, and I will bet £10 a week, and I get nervous about losing that. I don't allow myself anything on my phone because I know what will happen. But it's not just young players either, is it, James? Because Andros Townsend last year was honest enough to admit that he lost thousands in one night, and he's a mature, sensible player in his early 30s. So it's not just kids, is it?
No, not at all. I think one thing I've learned more broadly since I've been in the field of recovery and the gambling space is that this genuinely can happen to anyone. It's not about protecting vulnerable people, so to speak. I think anyone is vulnerable to gambling addiction when we have this thing in our pocket that's so easy to use. And I heard Andros Townsend and Stephen Corker both talk so openly about their addiction. And for the first time, actually, they started to mention the role of the gambling industry. They started to talk about how they preyed on their VIP status, for example, which is good. We need more footballers to be open as possible about that.
Well, I thought it was very interesting as well, because Andros stressed that alcohol wasn't involved. He put it down to boredom mainly. But is alcohol a contributing factor, do you think?
That's an interesting question. For me, it wasn't. I mean, I would gamble the minute I would wake up. I didn't need any extra incentive to do so. I think there are examples where gambling is pushed in environments which involve drinking, which you could argue is irresponsible in itself. But for a lot of people that struggle with gambling, there isn't that comorbidity. It is just this single issue. That's obviously not always the case, but it's the power that gambling has, that you don't really have much time or money, quite frankly, for other things as well.
Is this exclusively a male problem, James?
Not at all. Once again, going back to people that I've met in this space, we meet so many brave women that have struggled with gambling, that this is a stereotype in itself, but the thing that draws them in is not necessarily what draws the men in via football and that culture of betting around that. But we have a situation where Loose Women is sponsored by an online bingo company, and the Bake Off, I think, was sponsored by an online bingo company. So it's not exclusively a male problem. And also, unfortunately, it's women that take the brunt of the effect of other gamblers. So it's estimated that there's up to 10 people affected by somebody else's gambling, and the vast majority of that are unfortunately women. And, I look back at and cringe at how I treated my mum, quite frankly. And I know that it's not exclusively a problem for men.
As well, I mean, you talk about this terrible figure, 500 young people taking their own lives a year. But it's not just them; it's the impact that has on families and communities as well. It's so where's the PFA in all this in football, James? Where is the safeguards? I mean, in any other industry, young people are looked after, safeguarded. Where is the PFA in this?
I think they're not there, to be quite honest. I didn't get. I'm not a professional footballer, obviously, but I didn't receive any adequate messaging or education or awareness. The only thing I got genuinely was when the fun subs stopped, and that's not sufficient to deal with a public health issue. And football has a responsibility. The FA won't touch gambling with a barge pole anymore. They had a gambling partner, they no longer have it, but they seem to have this neutral stance where they won't support charities or campaigning organisations. But I think we need football, and especially football clubs, to recognise this is harming people in their communities to the point of suicide. As you say, 500 people in this country every year taking their own life because of a preventable illness. That's a complete shame on our nation, and football is complicit. I'm sorry to be quite strong and passionate about this, but football is complicit in that harm, and it's either blind to this harm or it is complicit. And I think, unfortunately, it's the latter.
We'll talk about that complicity in a minute. But Kieran, I want to bring you in here because it's disappointing to hear what James says about the PFA, because the PFA, as you've discussed, have been quick to highlight the numbers of players who get themselves into financial difficulties after football because of gambling, haven't they?
Yes, it's just not gambling, but it's a collection of things which I think contribute towards footballers' monetary problems. And Dean Hammond, I think, was very open last week when he was saying that what do you do? You've got time on your hands and you don't know how to deal with it. The PFA have a responsibility towards their members. It is a trade union and it should be acting on behalf of the members. And I think it should be going to clubs and saying, you are not looking after our members by making them so exposed to the gambling industry. We're fully aware that when a new gambling sponsor comes around, they want the players to buy into the brand, and therefore they'll set them up with a VIP account, and they'll give them a line of credit, and that line of credit goes very quickly, and that's when the problem starts, and it takes a long time to turn it around.
I don't really know how to ask this question, James, without getting whatever I ask you in whatever format, open question, closed question. We probably haven't got time for you to answer it fully, but the relationship between betting companies and football is already toxic, and it's not getting any better, is it?
No, toxic is the perfect word for it. I think we reached saturation point a long time ago, and I don't see it getting much better for all the noise. And obviously I'm involved in a campaign called The Big Step, which tries to end gambling, advertising and sponsorship in football. And it does feel like sometimes we achieve things, but the reality is I'll watch a football match tonight and for 90% of the game, a gambling brand will be visible. Yeah. So we have a long way to go. I think it's 36 clubs in the Premier League and Championship have a listed official gambling sponsor or partner, not to mention, obviously, the EFL and its Sky Bet relationship. And, football, as I said earlier, football is blind to this harm, and it forgets the fact that a large percentage of this money comes from a small percentage of players. So it's estimated 60% of profits come from just 5% of players for the online gambling industry. So this isn't an industry that's built on sustainability. Unfortunately, this is an industry that addiction is integral to their business model. And that's the money that's going from communities back into football clubs. And that's, in my opinion, that's not sustainable. It's completely against the ethos of what football clubs well rooted in their community should be about.
And the problem is as well, because I'll be watching the same football games as you become immune to the other. It just becomes visual noise in a sense, doesn't it? And then suddenly you'll see electronic adverts in different languages, which you assume are for gambling companies. And some of the times you'll see a shirt front sponsor for a company you've never heard of, and you just have to assume they're a betting company. I mean, there's so many Far Eastern, for example, people like ManBet, for example, who you've never heard of here, who've suddenly plastered all over Premier League football clubs.
Indeed, and many of them don't even accept UK customers, so they're exclusively using this Premier League shirt space to market their products to a wider global audience. And what have we become? I remember the days when football used to promote stuff that produced stuff, that made stuff, that contributed to the UK economy. These companies don't provide anything to the UK economy, but once again, they're just complying with regulation. Regulation has allowed for companies based in the Philippines to put their brand on the front of a shirt in Burnley. It's like these things, it's regulation that needs to change. And you say about being immune, I take the point entirely. Like, it's completely normalised when we watch football. We're just used to seeing it. But I will say there are people that do get triggered by that. And there's people that will see one of those betting companies and be like, oh, I've not used that one yet. I've already tried 20 others and tried to self-exclude myself. And every single time that makes it harder for people, and the relapses happen and addiction just carries on.
But I guess, Kieran, here's the problem. In a time of financial crisis, for a lot of clubs, for the FA, for the Premier League, it's only gambling companies, along with countries, if you like, who can afford to sponsor Premier League football clubs now.
Perhaps now is the case, but this gambling issue has been in the public domain for at least a decade, and we've done nothing. So when the times were good, the football clubs were prepared to take the gambling companies' money, and now that the times are bad, and we know that the industry is suffering as a result of the pandemic, what the clubs are using, and also I think the EFL's complicit in this. They're saying, "Oh, we need more evidence," and it's very much like the situation we had in the early 1970s when the big tobacco companies were saying, "Oh, we're not sure there's a problem with tobacco and cancer. We need more evidence," and everything's down to pushing the problem further down the line. Gambling's been around for a long time, but don't think anybody, James isn't asking for prohibition. He's asking for common sense. And unfortunately, the football industry isn't prepared to accept that.
And James, this may sound like an odd question, but has coronavirus affected the issue, not just financially, but because a lot of players now have more time on their own than perhaps they would have done before?
Yeah, I think I use the term perfect storm. I think coronavirus and lockdown has probably exacerbated that even more so. I know myself, I'm relatively stable in my recovery. I never got any support or treatment for my addiction, which is quite rare in itself, but I need it now. I'm struggling with, like everybody else is. And when you're trying to deal with an addiction, like if I honestly was still gambling during this, I dread to think. I don't even, as drastic as it sounds, I don't know if I'd still be here, because I can't imagine what it was like to just be at home, not doing very much, with financial woes. And we talk about the football industry suffering during the pandemic. Well, I tell you one industry that hasn't, the gambling industry, and their profits are soaring. And that, once again, comes from people like me. And I think it's time when we start looking at when you've got a pandemic-proof industry like that that's using football as a product to further their profits, we need to start thinking about how can that industry put money into football without exposing kids to gambling advertising.
That's the other thing as well, is that football doesn't even make money. At least in horse racing, they charge a levy to the betting. At least horse racing can argue, rightly or wrongly, that the betting companies are putting some money back into the sport. That argument doesn't exist in football, because football itself is making no money from the gambling industry. It makes no sense.
No, the only money that it gets from the gambling industry is obviously advertising and sponsorship revenue, which in itself is just a form of increasing its customer base. And I think it has been mooted before, a fair return levy, but it was obviously dismissed straight away by the gambling industry. But maybe it's time for government to consider alternative funding options for the gambling industry in sport. We know that public pressure is mounting on this issue, and it'd be nice to have solutions, because nobody wants football clubs to collapse. Nobody wants to stop people having a bet. But as I keep saying, nobody wants kids growing up thinking that they've got to have a bet on to watch the football.
Do you think there'll come a time in 5 or 10 years' time when we'll look back and say, I can't believe that there was gambling adverts? Because in exactly the same way that we look at smoking in public places, or advertising for alcohol at football, or tobacco at football.
I really hope so. I do worry that even in 10 years, looking back with hindsight, we'll probably still be dealing with the damage that was caused by this relationship. And, you do watch back sport with tobacco advertising. It just looks incredible. It created a generation of people denying that there was an inherent risk to an activity. And I think football is doing that now. And, there are positive noises. The Gambling Act review is currently happening. And, there might be a time not so distant at all, in a couple of years' time, where we don't see gambling-based shirt sponsorship at the very least. But until we have that day where there's no gambling promotion visible in front of young fans, we'll keep campaigning.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for all of this, James. It really has been quite illuminating for me, because I'm a person that doesn't really understand gambling, because I don't do it. If there'll be people listening to the show who might have some issues, and they might be now sort of saying, well, what can I do next? Because I think I might have a gambling problem. Is there anywhere they can go? Is there any advice you can give to them? Is there anywhere they can reach out to that can help?
Yeah, definitely. The first thing I'd say is don't think that this is all your own fault. Like, don't put all the responsibility on your own shoulders, because that can cause more harm, more addiction. And reach out to people. Be honest with yourself. If it's causing you to change your behaviour, if it's causing you to treat people differently, start to reassess that, and be honest with the people closest to you. And there are practical tools out there. If you search Talk, Ban, Stop, that will give you some really good advice on how to block gambling and how to stop by self-excluding. And there's also the NHS gambling clinics in the north and in London as well, which provide specialist addiction treatment. So my message is that there is hope and there is help. Don't despair. Gambling doesn't have to define you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James. We really appreciate your assistance and your insight into this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Do you know, Kieran, for the first time in my life, probably, there are a couple of moments here when I really didn't know what to say to James, basically. I thought his honesty was fresh and his anger, but I think there are people in football who need to be made to listen to that interview, don't they?
Yeah, I think they do, and I think they will be the people who will choose not to listen, because there's a lot of cloth ears in the sport at present. There's a lot of denial that football and the gambling industry, which do have close links, and as James rightly said, he's not out to stop gambling. He's out to stop that initial addiction. That the lines are far too blurred. At times when I'm watching, I'm watching Sky, I'm not sure whether I'm watching a show or whether I'm watching an advert, because you've got the same people. You've got the people who are presenting the shows are now the voice pieces of the adverts for some of the gambling companies, and it's too insidious, and there's too many of the adverts. And as for the sponsorship, I mean, you rightly said, could we name where the countries are that these gambling companies are based? Because 12 months ago, I hadn't heard of half of them. And I suspect once they stop their advertising, once somebody else comes in, we'll forget them instantly, but that they will have done what they set out to do, which is to increase gambling awareness in Asia.
Yeah, and thank you for taking over with the last couple of questions, Kieran, because when I thought there was a technical fault, it turned out I'd accidentally dislodged the cable reaching for my cup of tea. When it turned out that you could hear me and I could hear him, but I couldn't hear you talk anyway. But it was great. It was a great interview from James, and it must have been very tricky for him to be so open and honest. And hopefully, if there are people out there listening who have issues, they know there are places they can go to get help. Before we go, Kieran, we have some news that I was supposed to mention on the last couple of quiz, because we're going to have a little quiz, aren't we, on Sunday night?
Yes. We're all in lockdown. We've not got a huge amount to do, and it will be sort of the last 24 hours before the match. So we won't be talking to each other on Monday night. That's for certain. I've already been booked in to do a Palace podcast on the Tuesday night, so that could be really painful for me.
Which one?
But yeah, so we thought, we really appreciate all the feedback we get from the listeners. We know that you enjoyed the quiz before Christmas. We have been nominated by the FSA for Fan Media of the Year, and we're genuinely touched by it. So we thought we'd give a little bit back, have the quiz. We'll try to get a few prizes. They won't be significant. I've got a new book coming out next week, for example, so you're more than welcome to a copy of that or two. But it will just be nice to see some of the faces of many of the people that keep us on our toes, and also have made this show quite good fun for all concerned.
Yeah, there are some decent prizes. Our new sponsors, Fugati, have generously donated a decent prize, which is nice. So as you say, it's not so much a quiz, Kieran, it's more a public plea for people to vote for us in the Football Supporters Association Awards.
Well, if they'd like to do that as well, that's by pure coincidence, because the deadline is on Monday. So it's pure coincidence that we're having the quiz on the Sunday night.
Yeah, but it was fun. The last one was fun, and this will be fun as well. And we'll all get involved. And as you say, we couldn't do it after Monday. Which Palace podcast are you doing? I noticed you ignored me when I asked you which Palace podcast you were doing.
Oh, it's is it Red and Blue Review?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, nice voice. So yes, in the meantime, what have we got a pod on Sunday? Oh, it's a busy day Sunday. I was going to say, well, we'll see you before the big game on Monday night. In the meantime, it's questions time for our next pod. If you've got any issues you want to talk to us about that we've discussed today, or any questions about any aspect of football finance, football finance, it's
sorry for that.
It's questions@priceoffootball.com, and meantime, we will see you. Well, we'll see you Sunday, hopefully. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.
The price of football. The price of football.